AI news for busy people. For the past 4 years, I've been spending 1 to 2 hours a day testing new AI services as they come out. I also talk a lot with top managers, specialists, and business owners to understand which AI tools are actually working right now and which ones are just marketing hype. In this episode, I want to share with you the most useful things I came across this week, stuff that's really worth your attention. So, what can you expect in this episode? The new Claude can replace jobs that until now were untouched by automation. Genspark, together with Anthropic, has launched new solutions for office applications. Zuckerberg has decided to clone himself. Now all Meta employees are on high alert. Apple might change its plans for releasing its foldable smartphone. Also, fifth generation AI avatars have been released, and scammers have learned how to fake biometrics. You'll find out about all this in our episode. So hit the like button if you're not a bot or an AI, and let's get started. And the main news is that Claude Mythras from Anthropic has been released, and it can hack anything. On one hand, there have been a lot of reports about how some people got access to it, while others are being denied access. This is a new model that can hack anything. It even hacks Linux, which no one had been able to do for 16 years, and nobody had even found that vulnerability before. That's it. Then OpenAI came out and said, guys, this is all just marketing BS, and that it's really just scare tactics to intimidate others. So for now, it's still unclear what this actually is, because people don't have broad access to it. For now, all we can do is watch these developments. But there have been some releases that are genuinely interesting and worth paying attention to. The first of these is the new Claude Design. This is an AI model that can, well, maybe not replace, but definitely speed up the work of people who do design and make things easier for clients. So if you needed to make a website or something else, the cool thing about it is that besides just generating a beautiful image, which honestly you can do anywhere these days, like on Banana or whatever, the real feature is something more. First of all, it's super convenient to edit afterwards. You can actually select any part of the layout and say, fix this, or this part sucks, redo it. Or you can just click on the element you want and ask the AI, either in chat or in your own words, to redo it. You can upload your brand book, your brand colors, and it will use that as the basis for everything it creates. And the coolest part is that you can hand off all these layouts for programming, design, and so on. And honestly, it really does speed up the workflow. So, for example, when creating websites, there used to be people who just did the layout. They weren't coding yet. They were just putting everything together. Now, all of this can just be handed over to a designer, and you pretty much don't need a separate person for that anymore. Then it's up to the designer and the programmer. Will this speed up the work? Yes, absolutely. Everyone in this industry will really benefit from it. The next news is about Sedance too. It's a model for generating amazing blockbuster-style videos. You've probably already seen these kinds of videos pop up. And on one hand, Sedance was actually launched and released a few weeks ago. But just recently, over the past few weeks, it's become available to everyone through the API, and now pretty much all the services, like Syntax, Hixfield, and many others, let you generate whatever you want with Sedance. That's good news. There are still some downsides, but even so, it does an amazing job with blockbuster formats. It looks really impressive, and you can create your own trailer or even a blockbuster. There are already tons of them online. Let me know if you've seen any of these, and maybe which ones caught your eye. So if you've already used it, share in the comments what you did with it and how much you liked it. The next story is for all the office workers out there. There are, well, two neural networks, Genspark and Claude, have almost simultaneously released add-ons for PowerPoint and Word. I don't know if anyone still uses Word. So basically, you can interact with the neural network right inside your document and ask it to perform certain actions. The main thing here isn't just that you can chat with it, but that you can say, tell me how to write this email. But we could do that even without these add-ons. But being able to ask it to actually do it for you, that's the next level stuff. And here, I want to give props to the folks at Genspark, because they're really leveling up and creating a genuinely cool service that's starting to take on more and more aspects of office work. OpenAI just introduced the new ChatGPT Image 2 model. Well, it's like Nano Banana 2, but for ChatGPT. From the ads, you can see that they're not just coming up with random images, they're actually planning out entire series, storylines, and so on. Of course, now we're going to test how good this thing really is, and whether it's actually better than Nano Banana 2. But one thing's for sure, Nano Banana 2 was already so impressive that basically it handled most tasks out there. And now, the unresolved challenges that still remain for graphic neural networks, which honestly still haven't been solved, are things like how do I create layouts, for example, of images or apartments, right? To make it so that, say, I have a layout and all the details from that layout are preserved in the 3D object. Whether it can actually do that or not, we'll have to test and see. If any of you have already tried it out, let us know in the comments. But I really think this is a great development. At the very least, it's already clear that Image 2 can incorporate more text into the layout. Finally, the guys realized the cool idea that, in fact, images are needed together with text, and it's their combination that creates the product people really want. So, designers, either you'll be doing even more work in the same amount of time for the same money, or the client will just do it instead of you. So, well, it looks like there's nothing we can do about it now. The next update is that Sunno 5.5 has been released, which makes music even better. We thought it couldn't get any cooler after Sunno 5, but now there's 5.5. So let us know in the comments which of these neural networks you've already tried and what your impressions are. Yeah, there have been other updates too, but I don't think we need to pay attention to every single one because some are truly revolutionary and can really change things, while others just happen in the background, and that's fine. So there are a few discoveries I've come across, and maybe they're old news or nothing new for some of you, but I really want to highlight them. And the first, probably the biggest discovery I've made, is a neural network for creating AI generated TV series. Now, maybe some of you are thinking, what? But yeah, even Forbes published an article saying that AI generated series are becoming a trend right now. So, what are AI generated TV series? These are videos generated by AI, where each episode might last about 60 seconds, and there are usually 10 videos like that in a series. They rack up millions of views. And what's interesting is that there are now services specifically for generating these kinds of series. And one of these services, which I personally tested all week, is called Duotong. I'm not sure. Maybe it was invented by the Chinese, but it lets you create series. Probably the most convenient thing is that you can quickly put together storyboards and specify the characters. For beginners who find it hard to figure out all the different neural networks and how to generate things with them, this is a handy service where the whole process is laid out and made easy to use. So I'm continuing to test it out. As soon as there's any interesting news about the Series 1 release, I'll definitely share it. The next discovery of the week, or let's call it the update of the week, is an update in NotebookLM. There's always something going on there. Now they've updated the covers so you can make your notebooks look nice and then share them. Not many people know that NotebookLM is a great tool, for example, for creating a wiki or a knowledge base within your company. So when a new employee joins, they need to ask someone, what's the deal with vacation policies? Or how should you communicate there? How do you get in touch with the manager? There are a lot of these kinds of questions. And in this case, NotebookLM is a great tool where you can quickly upload all sorts of guides and company information and then share this chat with your employees. And now you can even make it all look nice. So overall, it's an excellent tool. I highly recommend using it. The next tool, and my discovery of the week, is Obsidian. And for those of you already using Obsidian, leave a comment below. Some people might say, well, that's hardly news. It's been around forever. That's true. But now I found an interesting way to use Obsidian for myself, specifically to use it together with neural networks. Obsidian itself is meant to help you organize files on your computer, kind of like your own personal Wikipedia. In one document, you reference another document, and in that one, you reference a third, and so on. And it lets you keep track of all these documents in your head, link them together, and easily jump from one to another. It's the perfect tool for programmers. But now it's also becoming useful for anyone who uses OpenCloud or other neural networks that work with skills, as long as you use them the right way. Because skills are basically files with instructions on what needs to be done, and they also start multiplying, there end up being a lot of them. They might duplicate themselves, spread out somewhere, and so on. And Obsidian lets you visually see the connections between these documents, which I think is actually a really useful feature. So in this case, I recommend checking it out, learning about it, and putting it to use. And for those who are already using it, share how you do it. The next discovery of the week for me is the soundtrack creation feature in ElevenLabs. Yeah, maybe a lot of you have already heard or know that you can generate sounds in ElevenLabs, You can specify what kind of sound you need, write it out in text, and it will generate it. But there's also another feature where you can upload your own video, and ElevenLabs will analyze the plot and what's happening in the video, and then create a soundtrack as if it were composed by someone like Hans Zimmer or another composer. It'll generate this symphonic music that reflects what's going on in your video. And of course, that's just going to be an amazing thing. So just imagine, for every one of your reels, you can create an amazing custom soundtrack just by snapping your fingers in ElevenLabs. I think that's a really cool thing for all content creators. Now, let's talk about the corporate world and how neural networks are being implemented there. Let me say right away that companies are still having a lot of trouble integrating AI internally. Why is that? Because on one hand, employees want to have access to all the neural networks, but on the other hand, the information security department wants to make sure that data doesn't leak out of the company. And that's a major contradiction, of course, which is still waiting for its perfect solution, honestly. Of course, the ideal solution here would be to deploy some kind of local model like DeepSeek. But the thing is, DeepSeek R1 turns out to be a bit too dumb to handle complex tasks. But if it were possible to run a model, at least on the level of ChatGPT 4, locally and let employees interact with it, that could actually solve a lot of issues. But for now, we can see that this standoff is ongoing. So, what comes out of all this? For example, employees working in a Microsoft environment for companies might run into a situation where they want to share some files with a neural network, like Genspark, through OneDrive, but they can't do it because of corporate security policy restrictions. So they end up having to download the files to their personal computer and upload them from there. Yeah, of course, some companies are more relaxed about this. The smaller the company, the more relaxed they are about it, but the bigger the company, the more restrictions there will be. And even, for example, installing open cloud on employees' computers is also a big risk. Well, besides the fact that open cloud could potentially break something, there's also the risk of prompt injection. Someone could insert a foreign prompt, and then open cloud might start leaking data and sending it somewhere else. So, of course, there are quite a lot of risks here, and it's clear that this slows down the process. Maybe that's actually a good thing, because if everything was implemented too quickly, well, the news might end up in the incident section. So that's how Mark Zuckerberg decided to clone himself. And, well, not just to clone himself, but to create his own digital twin who would help his 79,000 employees so they wouldn't have to go to him directly, but instead to his twin. So that this twin, knowing how Mark makes certain decisions, would hand out the same kind of, well, sometimes pointless decisions. All right, we don't know all the details, but judging by Meta's work over the past few years, Meta, which is banned in Russia, we can see that they've pretty cluelessly lost the race in the AI field. Well, anyway, let's see what they'll do next and what they'll be working on. So, actually, why did I bring up this news? This is something that almost every manager dreams about. I don't know, if you have a manager, would you want to have a digital manager? But I think managers want things like this because it lets them delegate part of their work. Obviously, AI can't do everything because there have already been cases among people I know who automated 90% of their processes with AI. This was at an advertising agency, and then they ran into a cash flow gap because the system turned out to be inflexible. And that's probably the key challenge here. So the first thing is how to train it to make decisions the way people do. That's one. Second, how do you give it enough context about everything that's going on around it? Because in reality, a neural network looks at the world through a tiny keyhole and tries to figure out what's actually happening. These things, of course, will slow down the process. But overall, the idea is a good one. Let's see what everyone ends up with. Here's the simplest thing you can do right now. You can ask the AI to create a master prompt for you, or you can use the link. I have a post about this topic called How to Create a Master Prompt, and you can ask the AI to make your master prompt, gather all the information about you, who you are, what you do, and so on, and upload it into a project in ChatGPT or wherever else. And then you can interact with it from there. Sure, it won't know exactly how you make decisions, but it will have more context about you and will be able to give you more accurate answers. And you can create these kinds of projects for each type. The issue of making decisions is very relevant, but I'm a little afraid to imagine what it would be like to work at a company where you're managed by an AI Mark Zuckerberg who's doing something or other. The next news item came up thanks to a user who wrote this in the comments. Neural networks can't invent things, they can only analyze what's already out there. Although being very precise is also useful for applied science. For example, you can use them to search for new medicines. And here, I wanted to share my thoughts on whether neural networks are actually capable of inventing. And since I've been studying this question for quite a long time, back in, I think, 2011, and I also took courses on design thinking, and in general, I'm pretty deeply immersed in the creative field, I actually wrote a detailed post on Telegram about this topic. What can we delegate to neural networks when it comes to inventing and creating something new, and where is human involvement still necessary? But to sum up the whole story, it turns out that a neural network can invent and create something new almost 100% in areas related to programming. Wherever something can be programmed, they can already do a lot of things, and we can see that happening. But when it comes to the real world, if something needs to be invented in the physical world, since, again, the neural network doesn't have any real data here yet, at least for now, enough data or enough context about how the world works, about how everything interacts between people, while this context is still lacking, we see that they can't handle it here. And that's where humans are needed. So it turns out that you need a human for context to really understand what's going on and to make those decisions. But overall, when there's no person, no hands, nothing at all to invent something, but you still need something, then a neural network is, of course, an indispensable assistant. I talked about this in detail on my Telegram channel. You can check it out there. Now, let's move on to the fourth section, cybersecurity and incidents involving artificial intelligence. The first piece of news worth mentioning is about Anthropic, working with the US Department of Defense and the government in general. Actually, in the last episode, I mentioned that there was a scandal about this. Anthropic said, no, we don't work with the Department of Defense. But then it turned out that employees of the US National Security Agency are still using Anthropic, including the new Anthropic Mythos, which is capable of hacking computers. So it makes for quite an interesting story. On one hand, someone banned it and said, no, we don't work with Anthropic. Anthropic said, we don't work with them, but everyone keeps using this thing anyway. So what's the point here? AI tools are still going to be used by everyone for all sorts of purposes. Most likely, there's no way we can stop or prevent this thing here. But the most important thing to understand here is that it's always a tool that can be used from different sides. Recently, there was a Wall Street Journal article saying that AI finds bugs faster than we can fix them. Of course, that's also a big vulnerability for companies and opens up a lot of opportunities for incidents. Because if AI can find a lot of bugs, then hackers, of course, will take advantage of these things, and there will be more and more leaks, hacks, or shutdowns of all sorts of things. The next news item isn't exactly about cybersecurity, but I'd still include it here. HeyGen is a company that creates digital twins. They released a fifth-generation avatar. So what's the deal with it? You can send this avatar a 15-second video of yourself saying something. And then, based on that 15-second clip, the AI will analyze it and be able to create videos of you speaking with your tone, your emotions, and from any angle at all. And then you can attach any text, any words in any language. And honestly, that does seem a little wild and strange. I mean, if this technology is already available to the general public, this is what's possible now. And of course, it's hard not to remember the incident that happened back in 2024 when in Hong Kong, a CFO ended up in a Zoom call where everyone else was a digital double, a fake, and he ended up transferring 25 million Hong Kong dollars to scammers. So if these things are now so easy to make, of course this can lead to serious situations and cybersecurity incidents. And in addition to that, I'd like to mention another piece of news. MIT Technology Review reported that cybercriminals have started using special programs that replace what the camera sees and swap it out for a video feed. As a result, they were able to bypass the biometric locks that the bank had set up. So basically, all this biometric stuff, when you have to turn your head this way or that, it's already becoming ineffective against new tools that involve both generation and programs that swap out this data. So what's happening in the world of hardware? Let's break it down. First of all, robo-taxis are already starting to roll out in London, and pretty soon they'll begin testing and launching them. And these won't be Tesla robo-taxis, but Waywow. Some people don't even know that brand, but these are robo-taxis built on a Jaguar platform. By the way, this raises some big questions for Tesla. Why are they so easily giving up the lead and not taking the initiative themselves? But honestly, I think that video had a huge impact. The one where the Tesla Robo-taxi, since it relies only on cameras and doesn't use LiDARs, which work like 3D space scanners, right? And the robot taxi drives right through a banner that had a road painted on it, right? And of course, that affected people's perception of Tesla's safety in this case. While installing LiDARs is definitely a much more expensive technology, but as you can see, it's safer in this situation. Next story, a machine just ran a marathon better than a human. Well, what kind of machine are we talking about? In China, they organized another robot race. And this time, what's interesting is that if last time there were just a few teams, maybe a few dozen, this time there were already hundreds of robot teams running and trying to complete a marathon. And if last time, out of a dozen, only a few made it to the finish, and those were still controlled by humans with joysticks, this time I think about 40% finished, and almost all of them were running autonomously. So it's only been a year since then to now. And if before we used to laugh at how robots couldn't do anything and how funny it was when they fell, now we can definitely say that a robot can run a marathon faster than a human. And that, of course, looks wow, impressive because in previous attempts, they could barely cover any distance and took twice as long as a person to finish. Now they're already faster. We'll see what happens next. But these technologies are already out there, they're launched. Apple might change its plans for releasing its foldable smartphone. Well, it's not news to anyone anymore that Apple is preparing to launch its new foldable smartphone. Of course, for me personally, there's still big questions. Who actually needs it? Honestly, from a convenience standpoint, it's a pretty questionable idea. What do you think? Is a foldable smartphone actually convenient, or is it just more hassle and showing off? But still, okay, they've assessed the market, there's demand, so they have to release it. And so they're gonna release it. But most likely, it won't come out in September, along with the main smartphones, but a little later. And there are a few reasons for that. First, because for one, this way they won't cannibalize the sales of their main new smartphone lineup that's coming out. And second, because launching a new foldable smartphone takes a lot more time for testing and quality checks, since there are a lot of things that can go wrong. And in general, the whole process, unfolding the hinges, new interfaces, and a ton of different issues that are still unresolved, all of that needs to be refined and tested. So most likely, the release of the foldable smartphone will be postponed for a while. They might even announce it in September, but it probably won't go on sale until a few months later, which is how they usually do it. The main thing is that it doesn't end up like Apple Intelligence, which was announced but never actually launched. Now, let's talk about space. Cloud computing has been launched into space. Yeah, so now cloud computing is literally in the clouds. So they've launched servers into space, which are now floating in orbit, self-cooling thanks to the cold of space, and as a result, they operate more efficiently. But for now, the prices for this kind of computing and for launches are astronomical. Makes sense, right? So it's really just an experiment to see if this could be done and to find out what the results would be. Of course, there are a lot of different risks and questions, like what happens if something collides with something else up there, or how this thing will handle various conditions. But still, there's no atmosphere, nothing's going to get soaked by rain, it won't overheat, and most likely, in the future, these things have a good chance of becoming entire computing factories up in orbit, running continuously. That's the news, folks. And if you want to learn and practice how to implement neural networks at work, which neural networks to start with, and how to do it yourself, you can sign up for the next free masterclass using the link below this video. There, we'll go through step-by-step methods for implementation, discuss which neural networks are best for which tasks, and with this step-by-step plan, you'll be able to go ahead and start implementing them yourself. So let's make our world a better place. Give this video a like if you're not a bot or a neural network. See you again soon. Bye.